You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Sterios and Crystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
Welcome, Jonathan. It's such a pleasure for me personally to have you at least presence on the screen, because it's been so many years since the last time I remember being in London and used to teach at Tri Yoga. And before we start, I do want to say something about what I knew you as back in the day when you were running Tri Yoga. There are only a handful of yoga studios around the world that have created this ambiance of welcome. And Tri Yoga for me, every time I would walk into that lobby, it just had welcome, like it was just wrapping its arms around me. And your staff was well trained, and it was just such a well run studio. And so I'm just going to get that out of the way. And then we're going to focus really on you, a little bit about your background, because now that we've sorted out that you've been an attorney and not in advertising, um, I would love to hear a little bit about what your life was like pre-yoga. And we do share this kind of common friendship with John Stirk, and how you and John met, and then what motivated you to start your first center. And eventually we're going to get to this place where you are right now. So why don't you take the floor and start at the beginning?
Well, thank you for your very kind words. And being English, I can't really handle that sort of stuff, so I'll have to put it away and deny it. But it's very rewarding what you said. I am genuinely grateful when you say that. It means a lot. So thank you for that. So I started actually meditating when I was at law school, not during a lecture, but I started meditating as a sort of counterbalance for, I learned to meditate as a counterbalance for sort of law, basically, and having to study and so on. And my first meditation I learned was TM, Transcendental Meditation. And and that was it really. And then I obviously became a lawyer. And then one day, um, I was doing pretty well. I had my own law firm by the time I was 27, 28. One of my partners said to me, "You're a bit weird because you meditate. My wife goes to yoga classes and the teacher's really good and she says she knows you." I ended up going to a yoga class, a one-on-one yoga class with this woman. At one point, I'm lying on my back with my eyes closed and I could see a wall of mirrors. And I was running, not wanting to look in the mirror. And I knew that I had to stop and look in the mirror because that was my life. And I started practicing yoga with John Stirk. So John Stirk was my first proper yoga teacher, and I used to go and have one-on-ones with him every week in a room above a wine bar. And he was a very strong teacher then. None of his Scarabelli stuff then. He was much more strict. And within 3 months of my first class, I had given up smoking. I used to smoke 40 cigarettes a day, and which is impressive, just trying to work out logistically how I did that. And I used to drink 14 mugs of coffee a day, each with 3 or 4 sugars, I think. And they said going to my office was like being in a pinball machine. I mean, everything got done really quickly, but it was, so I started my yoga practice with John, my physical yoga practice. And then I didn't suddenly become a Swami or, it just infiltrated my life. And it's one of those things that when you look back, you realize what the trigger was. But at the time, I didn't connect a physical yoga practice with changing how I lived. And but a few years later, I ended up going to an ashram. And all my friends laughed when I told them I was going to an ashram. But that really was the beginning of how, it was just part of the process, really. It wasn't the beginning, it was part of this process. And I went to an ashram and I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. I thought it was like a holiday camp sort of thing. And the joke is you had to leave your shoes outside your room, and I thought they were going to be polished for you in the morning, sort of thing. That was really pretty interesting. when I got there, they said, your room's upstairs. I said, is there someone to take my luggage? And I went in, the room had bunks in it. I said, you've made a mistake. It was sort of, anyway. One of the things I learned there was, and I learned over the years from going back, was that yoga was not just this physical thing that I thought it was. And I learned, obviously I meditated more deeply, but I also learned about chanting, which used to spook me in the beginning. It really freaked me out in the beginning. And I learned about service. And to me, that was the thing. And the attitude of service, of serving someone, not in a subservient way, but in a very honoring way. And my first service or saver in the ashram was emptying trash cans. So I was this very cool lawyer in my head going around the ashram emptying trash cans. But I actually felt really happy. And I realized it was just that doing something because he wanted to do it out of it, almost as an offering, was an extraordinary lesson for me. And so that started this sort of series of events in my life of change. And I never wanted to be a lawyer. It wasn't my ambition. That's another whole story, which I won't bore you with. And you end up suddenly, you qualify, you build your practice, you open your own practice, you have people working for you. And you're on this sort of path or road, and it doesn't stop. And I liken it to being driving on the motorway or freeway in a very fast car, just driving in the fast lane and just living my life, and never seeing any signs about what the alternatives are or what you could be doing. And then it's a slightly embarrassing story, but I had no idea what I was going to do. And I went to see a palm reader. And have you ever had your palm read?
Oh yeah. Actually, I have had palm readings before, but they were more like at carnivals where the credentials of the palm reader were probably not up to snuff. So it
Yeah.
sounds like maybe you found one that was more tapped
Well,
in.
Yeah.
we'll find out.
I've
But
always
anyway,
wanted to
she
do
was
that.
very interesting. Huh?
I've always wanted to do that.
I don't have her number anymore, but otherwise I would tell you who it was. But anyway, this may or may not be true, but I think I learned this. Your left hand is your past, and your right hand's your future. And when she was looking at my past, she said things that were really scary that she knew them about me. I mean, I knew them, but not everyone else knew them. And she knew things about my past. And then she looked at my right hand and she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a lawyer. She said, oh no, that's not what you should be doing. So I said, well, I know that, but I don't know what to do. And she said, well, you need to change your job. And I said, yeah, but I don't know what to do. And this sort of thing went backwards and forwards. And I jokingly said, you mean I should go back to my office and hand my notice in? And she said, yeah. So that's what I did. So that day I went back to the office and I was now part of a much bigger practice. And I went to see the senior partner and I handed my notice in. And can you hear that noise again, Peter?
Yeah, I can.
You want
It
me?
just
Don't me
stopped.
stop.
That
No,
is really interesting.
it's okay. There's a spirit here, I'm telling you.
Yes, I agree.
Thank
And
you.
Jonathan, while we're at it, if you could catch yourself when you're leaning into the camera, your
Okay.
head is growing. I mean, I think it's fantastic. But if you catch yourself,
Yeah.
anyway,
Okay.
perfect.
Right. So, shall I continue?
Yes.
Please.
So I handed my notice in and I had to work a year's notice. And I thought in that period of time I would find out what I wanted to do. And it wasn't that way at all. And but I was involved in new businesses, starting a sushi bar and another business in the entertainment industry. And eventually I came up with this idea of opening a holistic health club. Don't ask me why, but that's what happened. And I went to the States and looked at all the health clubs and I looked at the yoga centers there. And I wasn't a health club person, but I just thought it was interesting. And I came back to London. I was going to call this place Tribeca, right? Because we think that's cool where I come from. And we raised £5 million. And decided we were going to, I put together a business plan. I met people, and together we put a business plan together. And about a week before we were about to sign on our first building, one of the investors changed their mind. And I remember sitting there thinking, what the blank am I going to do? And I talked to a friend of mine who was teaching at Yoga Works in LA. And she said, why don't you do what you love rather than doing health clubs, which is not your thing? And she said, yoga's big here, and that's what you should do. And I had Tribeca on my computer, and I changed the BECA to YOGA, and suddenly had Tri-Yoga as a working title for a place. And I went back to America, and I met Chuck and Matty at Yoga Works, and I met David and Sharon at Jivamukti, and I learned from them, watching what they did and working, seeing how the centers worked and what the schedules looked like. And I went back to London, and not quite hey presto, but that's how it started.
Yeah, that's this in the same way that we walk into a first yoga class, walking in as an owner, it's quite a karma in a way. Like I've owned 4 yoga studios in my past, and each one of them was unique. Each one was a gamble. In the end, in hindsight, and maybe you feel this, although that's the question I'm going to ask you, that you're doing it again. My karma was like to be in service as well, and to this day, it's still the same. This podcast is an example of me. Never in a million years would I would see myself being a co-host of a podcast, and just one coincidence, really, one coincidence after another, kind of paved the way. So this karma that you have is impressive from my point of view, and I want to hear some stories about the early days of running a yoga studio. Like, do you have some stories that just rise up above the cream, so to speak, that are strong influences in your life moving forward?
Running Tri-Yoga, you mean, the early days?
Yeah, just, I can think of, an example. Here's an example. I had this opportunity at First Yoga Studio in San Luis Obispo, where I live. And this is back in the early 90s. And I just saw it as an opportunity because this is a little university town halfway between LA and San Francisco. So it isn't like it's got its finger on the pulse of modern culture to speak of. And so I opened this center, and one coincidence after another just supports my commitment to renting a building and renovating a building and all the things that you did in that lovely space, in Primrose. It was Primrose Hill, right? Where you were, the start. Yeah. So the one just magical thing that happened is one morning before classes were beginning, I was there doing my morning practice. The studio was on the second floor, and the door was down at the ground floor. And I hear the door open down the stairs, and up walks this lovely woman from China who had immigrated with her husband to San Luis Obispo. In broken English, she said, "I'd like to teach here." And I could just feel her presence. Like it was like, whatever you're teaching, I want to have it here. It turned out she was like a gold medal child Tai Chi teacher from mainland China. Like she was just at a level all of her own. And here she is in San Luis Obispo. And, her classes were the best attended classes at our studio. And she had 4 or 5 classes a week. And that early support and having someone of her presence in our studio energetically just helped support this thing that we were doing. And to this day, those memories of how eclectic our studio was in the day. And that's kind of the same feeling I had at Tri-Yoga, because you did have other modalities there. And that was kind of cutting edge, I think.
That's a lovely story, firstly, and I'm leaning back. And so it's a lovely story. And I think as you were talking, I was listening and thinking, so many things, you obviously have the same experience, happened that when you look back, the only way to describe it is being guided and protected. because just so many not weird things happened, that like we never had a guest teacher program in the proposal for Try Yoga at the beginning. And then John Scott came. Simon brought John Scott to Try Yoga. And then suddenly we developed this amazing guest teacher program that, at one point, I think before COVID, we had probably 25 or 30 serious guest teachers, of which you were one, who were coming there. And we had a mix of the most experienced with the ones who were up and coming. So all those when we opened, we had this fixation of having our logo painted on the wall. So the Try Yoga logo was purple, and the wall of the building was a sort of beige, like a sort of cream color. But we weren't going to have it because we were so pure. We weren't going to have a Perspex sign. We had to have it painted on the wall. And trying to find a person to do that was quite difficult. Anyway, about 2 weeks before we were opening, we found this amazing guy who did it. And I remember the Saturday, he came to the building and he set a scaffolding up because the logo was what you'd call the second floor. We'd call it the first floor. And he started painting, and I left and I went home, and I saw my girlfriend, and we came back. I went back about 4 hours later, and the logo was on the wall. And it was this amazing feeling of like it's real now. And I rang my girlfriend. I said, I'll pick you up and come have a look. And I went to pick her up. It was only a 5-minute drive. I picked her up. I came back. And as I was driving back, it started to rain a little bit. And, and I drove into the courtyard. You remember that courtyard there? And as I drove in, that purple sign was melting down the wall. I mean, it was like a joke. It was melting down the wall. And I rang the guy up and I said, Oi, like, where are you? It's melted. And he said, it's impossible. When I painted, it sets immediately. I said, it bloody hasn't. And he had to do it twice. And whenever I used to go into that building, we were there for 14 years, there was always the space below the sign that was a slightly different color from the rest of the wall because the purple had sort of infiltrated them. Yeah, but you had all these amazing things that would happen that you sort of realize they've happened all the time in our lives without being simplistic. Maybe we've become more aware of that grace that we have. This probably is a word, actually, that the grace that is there for us. And maybe we see it more than we used to. And I think one of those questions you sort of sent me, I found them really thought-provoking. And I think it could be wrong, but I think that the practices that we do, say I'm chanting or I'm meditating, whatever I'm doing, I do that practice, but then it infiltrates the rest of my life. It's not like I walk around chanting all day. It's something that happens as a consequence of that makes me see things differently, or makes me more aware, or makes me more sensitive. So I think when you talk about the things you're saying, the stories, I used to see people coming in one state of mind and leave in a different state. That's almost why you do it, because it's just so extraordinary. And I think then I realize that you can do that in any business as it happens. I don't think we have sole control of impacting, uplifting people. I think that we can do it, whatever walk of life I do. I have the possibility of, without sounding egotistical, uplift people.
Hey, quick note. Peter's Inner Teacher Academy is launching soon. If this is resonating with you, head over to innerteacheracademy.com and grab a spot on the waitlist. These trainings are intimate and space is limited. So if you want to be first in line, tap the link in the description below and sign up.
You can also see details about my 2025 retreats at some incredible locations around the world, like Iceland, Austria, California, and New Zealand. Attendance at these trainings will count towards in-person hours for the Inner Teacher Academy. And now let's get back to the magic. Yeah, I've had those experiences too. I want to touch on this just a little bit. That first studio up that steep flight of stairs, old, brick building in downtown San Luis Obispo. One of my favorite things, how at the end of class or at the end of the day, you're cleaning up. I mean, my studio was small. I didn't have people. I was doing it. And my favorite find someone had left behind was a cane. Because that flight of steps down to the street is torturous, and this person must have had such an uplifting experience that they were able to notice walking without a cane. So to me, that's fantastic. And then regarding that, what you said about yoga is one opportunity, but any business has this opportunity for grace. And grace is a powerful word for me. It's half the title of my book, Gravity and Grace. And I have these very potent experiences of grace in my life. On the business side of things, Manduka is one of those businesses that I had no intention of starting. And then it just kind of fell in my lap. And every obstacle to not do it, just dissolved. And the next thing you know, I'm running this company. And the next thing you know, the history of that company was I found this mat that had potential to be something earth changing, practice changing. And the first shipment, I gave half of the shipment away to all the yoga teacher friends of mine, all those, top teachers you were talking about. I just gave them that. Say, just someday, just let me know what you think, and sure enough, that, before there was something called viral or influencers, there were these friends of mine that had this mat that were out there, sharing their joy of this unique product. So yeah, I relate to what you're saying in so many ways.
It's funny, I was just thinking about, you mentioned at the beginning about the staff at Tri-Yoga. And after the first 6 months, we weren't making money. It was pretty tough. And we had a woman who did feng shui for us. And she came to see me. She said, "Oh," she was always a bit, like, "Oh," and she said, "You're hemorrhaging money." I said, "Look, yeah, okay, thanks." And she said, "It's the wall on the stairs." I said, "What are you talking about?" And there used to be so our building had a ground and first floor, and the studios were on the first floor. And halfway up, there was a wall that we'd painted purple. That was our Tri-Yoga color. She said, "Oh, as long as that wall's purple, you're gonna hemorrhage money." And I thought, for God's sake. Anyway, and in fact, Simon was teaching that night. And so I asked him to go out and buy us some paint. I said, "What color should it be?" She said, "White." Okay. I asked them to go out and buy some paint pots. Paint pots, not little ones, and some rollers. And the class went in at 7 o'clock. And while the class was in, this girl who worked with me called Rachel and myself got up on a ladder or ladders, painted the wall white. And when the class finished, the wall changed. And of course, that was a big change of Tri-Yoga. I'm joking, but it was a sort of atmosphere when you open somewhere and people are part of it. You do things together that are so enjoyable, and it was such a lovely feeling. So we had all those sort of things that went on there. And yeah, it was an incredibly uplifting place to run.
Yeah, that's the positive side of the karma equation. Like you have this amazing opportunity to connect people, and I can't tell you the number of people that met and got married in that first studio of mine. Just people that were looking for something and they found a community of people with the same interests, and all these romances started. So it's kind of it's kind of cool. So let's move forward a little bit now to what was the decision process of selling, of closing Tri-Yoga?
Selling, well, I think it was partly driven by COVID because pre-COVID we were doing pretty well. From memory, we had about 840 classes a week across the 5 centers. I think we had 840,000 visits a year, and yoga visits that year, to give you a sort of sense of perspective. It was big, and it was financially viable. It was definitely financially viable. People think you're rolling in it running yoga centers. It's a slight illusion, and partly driven, I think, by the price. That people see the price of a class, as say a drop in price of say £20. But the reality is the studio never gets that because firstly in England it's we have VAT, value added tax, so that you get £18 or £17. Then everyone buys packs and memberships and so on. So that no, it's a lot of it is about having lots of people in classes, but you also want to have classes that maybe aren't that busy, but they're important to you because I want to have that style of yoga or that particular teacher teaching. So I think it's important. So you're trying to balance that. So pre-COVID, we were pretty good, and so that was 2019, 2020. So we've been open for 20 years. We had approaches pre-COVID about buying us, and I enjoyed what I did. I think that I could have done certain things better when I look at it. There are things I definitely could have done better. Then during COVID, it was pretty intense in London. We were closed off, on and off for 11 months. And even when you're open, we had all these social distancing rules. And 2 meters from mat edge to mat edge was, a studio that took 75 students could take 17 students. Not that you had 17 students because people weren't coming back. So, but we found a way to navigate it. We were online. The guest teachers were extraordinary in that year. We had all our guest teachers did workshops for us online, and you suddenly realize that there are no walls when you're online. So you could have 500 people, very rare, but you could have 500 people. And the teachers are really, really supportive, which was lovely. And then but they're, running a place where you have investors. They have sometimes, when you're doing well, everything's hunky dory. And when it's a bit challenging, it's not so hunky dory. And we were under quite a lot of pressure from one of our main investors about how we ran it. And I felt strongly about how we looked after teachers during the pandemic. We decided we had to give them a minimum. If they came in to teach, they had to have a minimum. There's no messing around. If someone's brave enough to come in to teach, then you have to deal with that. So it got pretty entertaining. And then my yoga manager, my yoga director, Jenny, left during that period. And she was really good. She was a really good yoga director for me. We'd worked together for 5 years. And I think after that, it wasn't as much fun for me. And we were under this pressure of whatever we were. And these people came along and offered to buy us. And my view was that I had two main responsibilities. One was to make sure Try Yoga could survive, because the pandemic was, the way I describe it, I think yoga centers had long COVID, right? You didn't suddenly.
Sorry.
Out of your phone. Aha.
Yeah, no, it's mine. Isn't that funny? Do you want to stop it, Crystal? And
No, this is real
okay.
life.
Okay.
But I will
You're
take
welcome
this as an
first.
opportunity to ask you a question, Jonathan. I want to
Sure.
know about, as long as you're touching on the challenges, since we're talking about my inner teacher and a lot of this, you mentioned earlier guidance and protection, and it made me think about trust and how you have to learn to trust yourself and trust the universe, even in times when it feels like, what am I doing? Where's this going? Is this going to be successful? When you're dealing with doubts and fears, where does trust come in? And what does that, can you share an example of what that looked like in this journey?
Can I tell you a story and then move from that? So when I was in an ashram, I was living there for 3 months, and one day I was lying on my bed in the afternoon taking a break, and I was reading a book, and there's this phrase, everything happens for the best. And I've always known that phrase intellectually, but as I was lying on my bed, it stopped being an intellectual understanding. It felt it was my experience. And I got off my bed and I walked through the grounds of the ashram. And people who I knew, who I maybe sort of liked, I suddenly liked them a lot more. And it sounds very cliche, but like everything's a little bit more vibrant. and I went to a yoga class up in the gardens on an open-sided sort of temple. My body was the most flexible it's ever been. And I didn't want to talk to anyone. I finished the class and I went for a walk through the grounds. And I remember stopping and looking up at a tree and thinking that everything happens for the best is real. And then I realized both everything that has ever happened to me and everything that will ever happen to me is for my upliftment. And it wasn't a theoretical, just a thought. It was at that point my experience. And I realized that is, when I contemplated, that's fearlessness or trust. So I'm not saying I walk around like that all the time. I wish I did, right? But I had that somewhere in my sort of makeup, that knowledge or experience. So when you're asking me about what happened in COVID, the way I deal with things is, firstly, I get freaked out by something or scared of it. Then I just get on with it and deal with it. And then I sort of reflect on it if I can. I'm not saying I do that all the time. So I think during COVID, part of me quite, hate to say enjoyed the challenge, but I sort of found it stimulating to have to try and navigate this thing that was in front of us and not knowing how it was going to work. So of course I used to lie in bed at night thinking, how are we going to survive? Where's the money? All that stuff. Probably a lot of the time I felt like that. And then somewhere inside me is this metal, I don't know what it is, that I don't think it's my ego. I mean, it could be, but I'm not sure it is. There's a drive of, it's not about success. It's not about being super wealthy. It's just you're on this thing and you want to get it done and you're navigating something. So that probably doesn't answer your question at all. I may have evaded answering your question, but I'm saying that I think somewhere it was really challenging, COVID, but I saw it as something that I had a duty to help navigate and to help lead. And that's what I felt. And maybe behind that was a faith and trust that, that I have. There's a lovely phrase I heard someone say, which I think faith is an experiment that becomes an experience. And so yeah, we navigated it. And so did that avoid your question, by the way?
No, that was great. I love that. And I love that quote. That's really beautiful.
It's not mine, trust me. I think it's an English author somewhere. Yeah.
This podcast, mission, let's call it, is for people not necessarily in the yoga industry, but any industry that have reached that point of, like, in a way, it's kind of an existential thing that, up at night worrying about whatever you're worrying about, wondering how it's going to all turn out. And then there's something that opens. It's almost like you have to go down, experience that, and then it opens into something usually unexpected. And for me, this intention setting that, I'm not big on intentions, like at the start of a yoga class, let's make this class intention, world peace or whatever it is. Because what my experience with that void down in the bottom of the pit is the trust that you described, I think eloquently, which this knowing or voice or whatever it is that kind of talks to you from the inside has something not better, but maybe just unexpected that enriches. And that's been my experience. So I just kind of say a little prayer, keep me open to possibilities. And that seems to produce results that I think are incredible. You have, the English have these gifts to humanity. One of them is humor, and your humor is fantastic. I'm really enjoying this talk. But Ricky Gervais, like, there's a national treasure, and I listened to him talk about this very topic, and there's just an honesty about the unknown, about mystery, and then finding this opportunity unexpected. And I like living like that. I feel that your commitment to service, my commitment to service, ultimately is going to give us a level of contentment. And I feel that deeply, that no matter what life looks like, I'm grateful for this time. I'm sure it's going to be different, at the end, you, you know.
It's sort of interesting though, isn't it? Because it's much easier looking back and going, yeah, I navigated all that stuff, right? And because when you're right in it, it's not quite like that. And I think so, because I think it's, for me anyway, I don't know half the time how I navigate it. I'm not being funny, I'm being serious. I have no idea how I got through it. And I do pray quite a lot, but I think that yeah, it's always easier for me to back and go, blimey, I was really being guided there or really being protected. But that whole COVID thing and leading up to the sale of Tri Yoga was pretty intense. I mean, I was pretty worn out when I decided at that point to sell. I was pretty exhausted. But as I said, my responsibility was A, for Tri Yoga to keep going, and B, to the teachers and therapists and students, that they had somewhere to go. So we sold to this company, and they had all these other fitness brands and so on. And under the assurance that we were all going to be, they fully respected Tri Yoga, blah blah blah, and I
Heard
was on the
that one
main board.
too.
Yeah, there's probably an echo on the line now, and it was sort of, and I was on the main board of the parent company and so on, and running Tri Yoga, and I realized that probably within 3 months, two things. I think I was very lucky to being trained how to run a company by my first chairman, who happened to have been the chairman of Microsoft, and he was one of my first investors at Tri Yoga, and he taught me how to run a company. And his name's David Swenson, ironically, Swenson, but not the yoga teacher. And he was a really good guy to me. He taught me how to run it properly. And I think so. I realized that not everyone runs a company that way, and people have different values. And I realized within the first few months that I'm pretty straight with people about where we are, and I like to know what's going on. And you were probably the same when you're running your places. I like to know what's going on. I like to know what the numbers are saying, and I like to have an idea of what's coming up and not put my head in the sand too often. So it was just different, and I realized that after 3 months, it was not for me. Yeah, about 3 weeks, but I realized pretty soon it was not for me, and I wanted to exit on a certain basis, which didn't really happen, to be blunt. And so, yeah, I left in July 2022. Yeah.
Yeah, the demise, let's say, of a vision is never, almost never, optimum. And my same story with Manduka, the exit was not optimum. Financially, it was fine. It's just the soul of the company uh, got lost, basically. And I'm now ready to have this like heart to heart with you, like, okay, knowing all that, here you are opening home, which I want to just tell you what a fantastic, brilliant name that is. The simplicity of it and how you're already using that to your advantage, not advantage, in a beautiful way, to give people that sense that I've always felt at Tri Yoga is it feels like home. The couches, the books laid out, everything about it. So how did you get here?
Well, I took a year out. I had two golden retrievers at the time, and the older one called JJ was getting quite old. Got to 14, so I had time with him. And I've got another one here who's 9 now. So I had quite a bit of time just decompressing. And I didn't think I would do it again. I had no intention whatsoever of doing it again. And I probably can't explain how it got to where it got to, but suffice it to say, I got to a point where people kept offering me buildings for a yoga center, and I said, "Oh, go away." And I said, eventually, I tell you what, if you find me a building in Primrose Hill, which is where the original Tri Yoga was, I'll look at it. Because I knew that people were telling me what was going on in the yoga world, and I felt that certain places had lost their soul, as you put it, and I felt that um, what we did was really, really good, right? And I felt that, and that's not criticizing anywhere else. I just felt that we had something special. And I used to get stopped in the street most days. I'm being serious. People saying to me, "Oh, blah blah blah," and I said, "Well, I'm not involved anymore." And they said, "We know," and that was very touching. But it's not the reason to do something. But it started to sort of make me wonder. And I was being sent details of buildings, and I kept saying, "Go away." And I said, "Find me a building in Primrose Hill." And then I rang up the agents. I said, "Look, the building that Tri Yoga used to occupy, which was redeveloped, is still on the market. Will the landlord talk to me?" He was the same landlord that Tri Yoga had when we left Primrose Hill in 2014. And I thought, "You'll never talk to me again." And he did. They said he would. And I had to find a way to make it work physically because it's a bit more complicated. But the name home was just what it was. It wasn't me sitting down and thinking about it. I just knew the name, and I know it was, part of my advertising background. That's a joke for us. But before I was a lawyer, so, um, so it was just the name, and it's a sort of funny thing. It was a bit like Tri Yoga had started to mean things to people. I'm going, it wasn't like that at all. It was just by luck. And then I realized home has extraordinary meaning for most of us. And I felt that we are so connected as people and so disconnected. And I felt that there was an opportunity to create somewhere that felt like home. And it doesn't mean you have all the same teachers, or the same decoration and things like that. I mean, there's some of the teachers, yeah. But I think it wanted to create somewhere that when you walked in, as you describe it, feels like you belong, and you don't have to be a member to belong. It's a feeling, and it's the feeling I get when I used to walk into the ashram I go to. It's a feeling that is just amazing. And that's what I'd like to do again, not to give me something to do, but I feel it's my duty to do it. I think someone needs to do it. And I was talking to my therapist yesterday about not going on about imposter syndrome, so I've got to stop. So, but she said, "You can't say that anymore." I said, "Okay, okay." So, well, I won't say it anymore. So, but I do feel like there's something possible, and it's quite a bumpy road getting it open. It's quite interesting. But I'm working with people I worked with before. The designer is one of my old guy I worked with I used to be his lawyer, right? And he was the most amazing property guy. And he designed 3 centers for me at Tri Yoga. He's got some amazing feel. And the only design work he does is for me. He runs his own thing out in the country somewhere, which has nothing to do with design. There are three of us sort of part of this team, and it's quite a bumpy road at the moment getting it there. But it feels like part of what you were just asking about when you hit the obstacles and so on, your inner faith and so on, and something kicks in and drives you to make it happen. And I have to remember at the same time, it's not me. I know that sounds a bit flaky. I have to remember I'm part of it, but actually it's not me. And I have to be really careful with that. Right? Oh, you're doing a really good job. No, you're not. This sort of thing. But having that sense of doing it for upliftment, to create a place for people is my duty. It sounds really heavy duty, sorry, but I do feel that, and I feel that sense of duty is what drives me, and probably drives people mad, by the way, but it drives me to really want to get it there and make it right for people when they walk in, that this is their place. And I have a thing about, I don't know if you remember at Tri Yoga, we had these great big desks when you walk in. Do you remember?
Yes, of course.
None of those. I've said we're having no big front desk. We're going to have people being met by maybe a small desk just for admin purposes, but basically they're going to be met by people, right? Or you can self-check in or whatever, but I don't want desks for us to hide behind anymore. I want us to be there for people. That when you walk in, you can self-check in if you don't talk to anyone, it's fine. But ideally, I want us to feel like you're being met, recognized, greeted, welcomed. And yeah, that was a long chat.
No, it's absolutely spectacular. And as it turns out, I'm going to be in England in May. Is your opening still planned for May? No.
Only in my head it was, yes.
Right.
I don't know. We had the meeting with the builders today, and I think probably June. I mean, God knows. It's a bit fraught at the moment, but I think but you can come and look at the building and go,
I want to.
Jesus.
It's the same building.
Well, it's actually the ground floor of the original building and the building next door. We've knocked them into one building. So it's all
Great.
on one floor, and the studios are all in the old building.
Fantastic. No, I'm excited. If for no other reason, Jonathan, I want to take you out to dinner. Like
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
just
You
have a
always tell
night
me.
and share stories. And it's amazing to me that the respect that I had for you back in the day, and then this gap of 20 years or however long it's been since the last time we've been together. Um, and then to reconnect through John Stirk, of all people, who I just coincidentally or
Yeah,
randomly met while I was teaching in Sussex last summer. And then John's books are so similar to my book, and I could have talked to John the first time for hours, and finally his partner had said, "You guys just stop talking about yoga, and just get outside and do something." But I'm super excited about your future in London, and somehow, if there's an opportunity for us to work together again, that would be exciting for me as well.
yeah, me too. The most excited person is my therapist. She's earning a fortune.
Yeah.
She's like, I think she's on a retainer now. It's no, I am most of the time I am really, really excited by it. I want to get moving, and the teachers coming are amazing. I mean, the teachers that teaching at home are really amazing teachers, and they're a lot of the older teachers, the more experienced teachers, sorry, who really mean a lot, and then a lot of the younger teachers who are the senior teachers of the future, and trying to get that balance and trying to get the styles right. The same with the therapists. It's it's a weirdly joyful task.
Yeah, and it's a work of art, assembling the creativity that it takes to build a community. I couldn't think of
Yeah.
anyone in London that is more perfect than you to recreate that.
It's
I don't
very nice.
see. Yeah, yeah,
I'm so tempted to deflect that, but I've been told I
I
can't.
know. So, Crystal, do you want to
Yes. Yes,
add
I
here?
do.
Yeah.
I have one more
I think
question
Crystal's
for
going to
you.
be you have the what do they call them, the good cop and bad cop. I'm about to get bad cop, Crystal.
What?
No, just the
I'm the good
opposite.
cop. Peter's the
She
bad cop.
she cleans me up
Oh, okay.
sometimes when
I'm just kidding. I You've been practicing for a while, a long time, and so I imagine that your beliefs have changed over the years. So I want to know, What's something that you strongly believed about wellness or yoga 10 years ago that your inner teacher has shown you differently now?
Yeah, I saw that one. I didn't like that one. Let me think.
Oh, it's a good
No, I
one
didn't like it.
though.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Let me think. Okay. I I don't know. It's about. I mean, I know you want an inner answer, but I think that I think one of the things that I think I've learned is about authenticity. And what I used to think was authentic and was fixed. And I realized that authenticity can change. And so I think that and in the yoga world, in the last 20 years, so many different styles of yoga have come. And, when we started, there was yoga, Iyengar yoga, Ashtanga yoga. I mean, this is when I started. And there was a very narrow description of yoga. And that's changed completely. And I think that, I think what is authentic is a really interesting question now. And I think a lot more things are authentic than I would have said 20 years ago. I was very stuck in what was authentic. So I think being open, and I'm not always open, by the way, but I think being open to these other modalities or styles, I think is important. And on the counter side of it is there's a lot of crap going on. Sorry. And trying to work out what is real and what is not real, I think for people is really difficult. And um, so I think that's a challenge for us, about what is real, and uplifting, and what is a load of, I can't say a word. And I think that's trying to get my sense around that, is, I think it's quite challenging, actually.
I agree. I think culturally, the evolution of yoga from India into the West, it didn't weather time well. And there have been episodes in this kind of transfer of information, intelligence, whatever you want to call it, into the West has had some ups and downs. And the downs meaning where teachers who called themselves gurus turned out to be just people, with good marketing. And that I'm feeling, I mean, it's this evolution of even this inner teacher podcast. There is such a groundswell post COVID of people who've been disappointed in their institutions, the government, their corporations, whatever it is, their doctors. And so in the yoga world, I'm feeling a lot of people don't have a relationship with lineage anymore. There's this, there isn't, it's confused. And ultimately, what my own yoga path has been is to find a lineage, let's call it, that is supporting creativity and innovation. When I look back on my lineage, Krishnamacharya, Iyengar, Shandor, Remete, and now my generation, we've all taken what we've learned and we've moved it into something unique. Not, I was going to say personal, but it's not personal. It, like you said, it's almost like we're guided. And what guided me breaking my back, like that forces you to question everything that you've learned up to that point. And ultimately, where I arrived is this inner path of the inner teacher. And coincidence, whatever, that there's people now that are interested in the steps towards the inner teacher. And that's where I feel like I have a front row seat, like I've done that myself. I don't know if you know this story, but when I broke with my teacher, Shandor, he basically said in so many words, actually, I'll tell you his exact words, it's time to get off the tit. And after the shock of that sentence settled, he said, oh, by the way, don't teach anything I ever taught you. So that's a good send off. That's a good way to kind of start tiptoeing into the void. And the void produced a book, an invitation from a book publisher for me to write a book that I wasn't a writer, and they had faith in me and they made it possible for me to write Gravity and Grace. So I'm now, like you, feel this call to follow that. And that's what we're doing with the podcast and every guest we've had so far, Jonathan, has been similar in authenticity as you. And I know there's a market out there of listeners that wants to hear those stories. And thank you. Thank you so much. I'm super excited, as I seem to always be at the end of these. Thank you.
Well, thank you. But actually, the questions that you ask, I find really thought-provoking. And I think that so I'm very grateful that those questions, even if you're not asking them now, you really made me think about some very important things. So I'm really well done, you two.
That's a nice place to end.
Hold on a
Thank
second.
you. Oh, yeah, sure.
So we're going to go about music before we go, because it's really interesting. You asked that question about the music of your life or something, right?
Oh, the movie?
So do you know the question huh?
Yeah. No,
The
I
one
think it
about-
was I think I read the same question, like if you had to pick a song, or was it a movie? I don't know.
Yeah, it was a song there.
Okay.
So music, so film genre was a comedy drama, obviously, and I was really stuck on the music, because I love music, and I decided that it was either My Back Pages or Forever Young would be a musical choice.
Great song.
Yeah.
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 Quite
I
good
relate
answer.
to both those. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah.
And
Thank
thank
you,
all you
Crystal.
listeners out there that are journeying with us on these lovely conversations, and I look forward to the next one. That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.